So I suppose I could just go down to the United States and start working with American counterparts to see if we can build more pipelines. They've expressed an interest in restarting them.
It was a conversation broached by the Prime Minister about the Keystone XL pipeline, which is a pipeline many Canadians are probably familiar with because it has been around, the idea of it, for more than 15 years.
If you listen closely to what Alberta's leaders are saying right now, it's not just we want another pipeline. It's something sharper than that. It's basically this. If Canada can't move big projects forward when provinces and the federal government disagree, then what exactly holds the country together when it really counts? That's why you keep hearing the Keystone XL name pop back up, even after years of political bruising. The idea hasn't died because the problem it was meant to solve hasn't died.
In the Keystone XL.
A test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with a collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country. A country is one where we support each other.
Alberta oil from Alberta down to Nebraska and beyond and into Texas, and allowing the United States to have a larger share of resources from Canada, to buy more oil from Canada.
Alberta produces the kind of oil American refineries are built to run, and the U.S. still wants steady supply from a stable partner. So when talk starts again about working with American counterparts, it's not small talk. It's a signal. Alberta is ready to act, with or without Ottawa's blessing, because waiting has become the bigger risk. And then came a move that set off the explosion. Alberta, while the federal political class was still busy polishing climate messaging and debating process, quietly lined up a new, massive corridor into the United States. 1 million barrels a day isn't a symbolic number.
Most abundant and accessible natural resources of any country on Earth, and yet we landlock them, sell what we do produce to a single customer to the south of us, while enabling polluting dictatorships to eat our lunch. For Albertans, these attacks on our province by our own federal government have become unbearable.
It's not a press conference fantasy. It's a structural shift. It changes where the money flows, who gets leverage, and who loses the ability to slow things down. The reaction in Ottawa wasn't just annoyance. It was panic, because this wasn't Alberta asking. This was Alberta demonstrating that the old system only works when provinces agree to be managed. The second a province proves it can move major energy volume without a federal stamp, the whole center controls the map. Idea starts to look shaky. From Alberta's point of view, the logic is blunt. For years, internal routes were blocked, delayed, reviewed, appealed, re-reviewed, and eventually strangled. British Columbia hid behind a tanker ban off the northern coast. Federal rules piled up until the pipeline industry itself started warning that approvals were basically impossible under the current framework. Add an emissions cap, add legislation that chills investment, add endless consultation that never ends in a yes, and eventually the message becomes hard to ignore.
We just want to be free. Free to develop and export that incredible wealth of resources we have for the benefit of our families and future generations. Free to pursue opportunities with the ideals of entrepreneurship, hard work, and innovation. Freedom to choose how best to provide healthcare.
Your product is welcome. Your money is welcome, but your growth is not. That's where the anger comes from. Not the kind you see on social media, but the kind that builds quietly in towns that watch nation-building projects turn into decade-long funerals. Northern Gateway, Energy East, Keystone XL, name after name after name. Each one sold as a turning point, each one eventually buried by politics. Alberta didn't just lose potential revenue. It lost time, momentum, confidence, and in some cases, real money that will never come back. And when leaders say things like, if everybody gets to get their products to market except Alberta, that's not a country. They're not trying to be poetic. They're describing a loyalty problem. A federation is supposed to feel like mutual support.
It is such an important day for the energy sector of this country. There have been, I know naysayers, and there's no better way to put that to rest and to say, look around you. This is being built.
This project is still facing a court challenge by several BC First Nations, but the hope here is that this pipeline will be completed, opening up new markets and boosting prices for Alberta oil.
Not a one-way pipeline of cash transfers and lectures. Now here's what makes this moment different. This time, there's pipe on the ground. There's spending already committed. There are contractors booked. There are schedules that don't care about Ottawa's mood. When you see tens or hundreds of millions put into compliance work and installation, it usually means the argument stage is over and the building stage has started. That's why the tone coming out of Alberta has shifted from pleading to certainty. They're not selling an idea, they're pointing at construction. And there's another layer too. The legal and political resistance that kills projects is harder to sustain when the project isn't just Alberta versus everyone. One of the smartest strategic changes Alberta is leaning into is Indigenous equity ownership. Not consultation as a box to tick, but real ownership with profit shares and decision-making power. It changes incentives. If communities along a corridor own part of it, the project stops looking like an outside force coming through. It starts looking like local infrastructure that communities defend, improve, and benefit from. That doesn't magically erase conflict, but it does remove one of the biggest weaknesses that opponents exploited in the past. At the same time, Alberta is making a bet on something simple: American demand. The U.S. burns through enormous volumes of oil, and many refineries are set up specifically for heavy crude. Alberta's product fits. That's why the U.S. interest in restarting big pipeline routes never fully disappears. It's not charity, it's alignment. Alberta wants market access. The U.S. wants reliable supply from a nearby partner. Deals happen quickly when both sides feel the need is real and the path is straightforward. But what really lit the fuse politically is what this move implies for Canada's internal power balance. For decades, the federal government's authority over energy infrastructure has worked in practice because provinces stayed inside the process. They waited, they negotiated, they accepted delay as the cost of doing business. Once a province chooses a route that bypasses the traditional bottlenecks, the federal government doesn't just lose a fight, it loses a tool. And that's why the federal response keeps sliding toward jurisdiction. Because jurisdiction is the polite way of saying, we don't have a clean lever to pull here, not if you're following this story because you care about Canada's future, energy policy, and how these fights actually reshape the country. Hit subscribe right now. This isn't just another pipeline headline. It's a stress test for whether Canada can still function as a team when one region feels cornered. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part, because what happens next will affect jobs, prices, and the political map in a big way. Back to the bigger picture. Alberta's argument is that it has been carrying a contradiction for too long. It contributes heavily to the national economy, while being told to accept rules that cap, slow, or block the very projects that create that contribution. Over time, the contradiction stops feeling like policy disagreement and starts feeling like punishment. That's why separatist sentiment keeps getting mentioned more openly now. Not necessarily because most people want to leave Canada tomorrow, but because the emotional temperature has risen to a point where people start asking questions they didn't ask before. What are we getting out of this? Why do we pay in while being boxed out? Who actually decides our future? Those questions don't show up overnight. They show up after years of canceled projects and communities watching opportunities drift away. Supporters of Alberta's new direction keep pointing to the scale of the resource base and the scale of the missed opportunity. They talk about trillions in reserves, about billions in annual GDP that could have been captured, about how different the national balance sheet would look if major pipelines had actually been completed. Opponents roll their eyes at the numbers or argue the future is supposed to be lower carbon and that building new infrastructure locks in yesterday's economy. But Alberta's answer is, even under aggressive energy transition scenarios, oil and gas doesn't vanish overnight. Demand persists for decades, and the countries that supply it will either be stable democracies or unstable regimes that don't share Canada's values. Alberta isn't trying to pretend that oil is forever. It's arguing that while oil still matters, Canada should benefit from its own resources instead of handing market share to polluting dictatorships. As they put it, when Alberta turns south, it's not just because it prefers the U.S. It's because the Canadian route has been treated like a maze designed to end in a wall. No Pacific outlet, no national east-west build-out, no predictable pruebas, just more process. And eventually, the province does what any actor does when boxed in. It looked for the exit. That's what this new corridor represents. An exit route that can't be choked off by coastal politics in another province and can't be paused by federal hesitation. It's survival strategy, not a negotiation tactic. Of course, this doesn't mean the fight is over. Projects of this size still face court challenges, community pushback, and a reality that infrastructure lives in the real world, not in speeches. But the momentum matters. A 1 million barrels a day corridor isn't a concept you can talk away. Once it's integrated into the U.S. system, it becomes part of the machinery. And machinery doesn't reverse itself because of a bad week in Parliament, that if this build-out continues, it also creates a template. Other provinces will watch, not because everyone suddenly loves pipelines, but because everyone understands leverage. If Alberta can reroute its economic future by going straight to the US, then the assumption that Ottawa is the unavoidable gatekeeper starts to look outdated. And once a gatekeeper is proven optional, everyone starts testing the gates.